Hey everybody, today's video is going over the difference between a hip flexor strain and hip impingement, or FAI. In the beginning, we'll describe a little bit more about how it feels. Mandy here actually has experienced both, so she'll tell you her personal experience. And then we'll show you a couple ways that you can actually test it at home. Hello everyone, my name is Dawn and this is Mandy.
Hi.
And we're at Performance Place Sports Care in Costa Mesa. And we are the locally world famous chiropractors here. And we're just gonna hop right into talking a little bit about the difference in how hip impingement or hip flexor issues could feel. Go ahead, Mandy, what's your experience?
So I've actually had both. I have hip impingement on my right hip, and on my left hip, I've actually strained it in the past. So when I strained my hip flexor, I was a track athlete doing some fast speed work. Felt a pop, and immediately my hip stiffened up and was super achy, super painful for the next, 2 months, something like that. And then on the right hip with the FAI or hip impingement, it really only bothers me when I'm sitting kind of like this, honestly, or if I'm sitting with knees up. And rather than that kind of achy feeling I felt on my left, it's more of a pinch right in the hip crease. Doesn't seem to fully go away ever. It just comes on when my knee is close to my chest.
So when you first strained your hip flexor, was it something you were maybe aware of all throughout the day? There were times it got worse, got better, but it was still kind of this low level lying happening all the time?
Yeah, it did get better with movement. And when I sat for a long time, like I was in college at the time, when I sat in lecture for an hour and stood up, it was super stiff and super achy. And as I warmed up a little bit more, it got better.
There you go. Was there any swelling or bruising that you noticed?
A little bit of bruising and a little bit of swelling, just kind of puffy in the region, but it dissipated within a couple of weeks.
Typically, muscle strains will come along with a little bit of swelling or bruising, depending upon how bad it is. But likely, both of them respond pretty well to rehab, maybe just building some support around the area with some core exercises, some glute exercises. There's no, cookie cutter approach to any of this. It always just depends on the person and how they're presenting, but we can show you a little bit at home how you can do a little self-diagnosis or self-testing and see maybe which one of these categories that you're falling into. Cool? Let's lay you down on your back, Mandy. And let's just start with actively loading the hip flexor, okay? So we'll actually be on your left side today. That's the side that you said you had your hip flexor strain on, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so let's relax the other one. I'm just gonna have you bring your knee and your hip up to 90 degrees and hold here. So here in this position, what she's doing is she's actually activating her hip flexor to hold her leg into position. Are you having any discomfort with this?
Right now, no.
Okay, and some of you at home might already have some discomfort, or you might not. Let's add a little extra resistance if so far you're not. Go ahead and push the knee away from you a bit, and you're gonna have to resist. You can slowly increase pressure to really load into that hip flexor. Any pain with that?
Just a little bit of ache.
Okay. Some people, you may notice that being here doesn't feel so good, but when you push, it might actually get better. So sometimes loading into the abdominal complex might make the hip joint itself feel a little bit better, that I think you might be falling more into this impingement category rather than the hip flexor itself. So if it does get better with pushing, start to think in that direction. So any other ways that you would load the hip flexor or test it at all?
You can try out different angles as well. So for some people, this angle feels totally fine. And when you get down like this, when that muscle is in a lengthened position, and then you push against it, it may trigger that symptom more. If you can come up a little bit before, if you also have this pinchy, go ahead and ignore this one, we'll go to the other side. But for the hip flexor, if you come up a little bit more and you feel fine in this position, and then same thing, push and feel pain, that may be indicative of the same thing.
Awesome, nice job. So now let's have you take the same leg and pull it deep into your chest as far as you're comfortable. Any discomfort there at all?
So this feels fine on this side, but I know from experience that if I did it on the other, it would pinch right in the front, kind of where my hip crease is.
Okay, let's try it on your other side since you know that you're dealing with a little bit of that. So as you pull it into the chest, what are you noticing?
Yeah, just like a pretty sharp pinch that comes on right when my knee passes a certain point.
Okay, so find that pinchiness, test it a little bit, and then do a little crunch for me. What happens when you do that?
There's no pinchy anymore.
Okay, and then when you relax back down?
It's back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are some things that we test in the office, that if your pain actually gets a little bit better with activating the abdominal area, then that might be something that we dive into as far as building some support for hip impingement or hip flexor, okay? What happens if you actually take that same knee and then pull it across your body a little bit, like you're trying to put it into the opposite armpit?
Ooh. even sharper of a pinch.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these two things here, if this is what's going on with you, you might be looking more at deep into the hip joint itself, dealing with impingement or sensitivity of the hip joint specifically. And then one other thing, I don't know how, sometimes it's really hard, but I know in the office when we test a little bit of what we call internal rotation, so I'm bringing her foot towards me, knee across her body, what do you feel there?
It's a little bit of a pinch, but not as bad.
Okay, and so sometimes you might be able to do this at home, maybe one hand on your knee, one hand on the other ankle, there you go, and pulling it and turning it into internal.
Yeah.
And there might be some sensitivity there. So all of these are a little more of the impingement type tests that we can do from home. A lot of times, I don't know what you've seen, but a lot of times I see that hip impingement and hip flexor issues go hand in hand.
Definitely.
Hip flexor issues tend to be secondary symptom to a more underlying hip impingement issue. Hip flexor tightening up for some reason, maybe it's being overused and it can lead to a strain. Or maybe it's its way of trying to support your hip complex because something's going on inside of there. So I do see that they go hand in hand. Once you treat the underlying hip impingement, the hip flexor symptoms end up going away.
Definitely. And that goes for people who just feel that their hip flexors are stiff. Like if you feel like you have to get up in the morning and stretch your hips every single day, we may actually need to look at the underlying structures a little bit more to see why that stiffness is there in the first place.
Absolutely. And if this is making sense to you guys, or even you want to know a little bit more, like, I don't know, all of this stuff is hurting, how am I supposed to know which one I am? There might be a webinar that pops up right now that you can click on. It dives a little bit more into categories of hip pain. It'll educate you more, so you can definitely click on that and take advantage of that free resource. If not, if you want to, you can go type in, I'm definitely a hip flexor issue, what else could I do? Go under our YouTube page, type it in, there's tons of videos for you to take advantage of. A lot of people are really sick of YouTube searching and figuring out what to do on their own. You can easily reach out to us, email us, call us, and we can help you build a program that's right for you.